Welcome to another episode of 30 Minutes in the New Testament. 30 Minutes in the New Testament is a 1517 Podcast Network podcast. You can go to 1517.org/podcast. Check out all the other podcasts that are living over there. And while you're over there, check out everything else that 1517 is doing. Events, academies, articles, videos. Check it all out. And while you're checking all that out, go to the donate page and you can become a contributor, which would be, a good thing to do. If you enjoy what we do here for free, do a little kickback to help it stay free. If you are someone that already does that, thank you very much. You do, in fact, make it all possible. Guys, we are in Matthew 24. We got through the first 14 verses, and Jesus is, talking about the destruction of the temple. He's doing some signs of the end of the age. He's talking about wars and rumors of wars and earthquakes and famines and tribulation, all stuff that a lot of Christians have taken to be talking about the end times, and we talked a little bit about how, yes, but they are in fact in the end times, and that this is when the end times sort of like really ramps up, and that the disciples are all going to experience these things specifically in their life. We are now getting to a section where Jesus is going to talk a little bit more about the temple and the abomination of desolation.
Both Luke and Matthew have basically this discourse. There's some differences, but for the most part, it's kind of covering the same stuff. A lot of it's about the destruction of the temple. I would argue maybe all of it is initially about that, and maybe also pointing us to the very end. We've talked about that a little bit, how there's this sort of already and not yet dynamic to this. And so we pick it up at verse 15. It says, "So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel," that's found in Daniel chapter 9, "standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house, and let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas, for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days. Pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Then if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Christ,' or 'There he is,' do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. So if they say to you, 'Look, he is in the wilderness,' do not go out. If they say, 'Look, he is in the inner rooms,' do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather."
Well, that's perfectly clear.
Yeah, let the reader understand.
Yes.
Let them understand.
Yeah.
It's always interesting when we come across passages that have that little note, "Let the reader understand," that it's usually about something that readers have debated about and not understood for all of church history.
Yeah.
But in this case, there are some clues here. I mean, we mentioned the abomination of desolation.
We should build an entire theology around this.
Yeah.
So
we would not be the first to do such a thing, Scott.
Somebody's already done that? Okay.
Yeah, a few, yes.
Okay.
But this abomination of desolation that Daniel talks about in chapter 9, there is some striking things that were happening in history when the Greeks were basically occupying Israel and Jerusalem. We know that Antiochus Epiphanes actually did slaughter a pig on the altar in the temple, which was considered to be at the time the abomination of desolation. We also know that there's reports from other historians that when Titus invaded the temple of Jerusalem in AD 70, actually it was a little bit before 70 AD, I think, that he did the same thing. So we do have historical allusions here that have at least some degree of fulfillment there when the temple was destroyed. Also, the instruction for people to flee to the mountains, to get away, because of how desperately bad it will be. That's, if you read Josephus and Tacitus on the destruction of the temple, you know that that's exactly what happened. I mean, it was they were basically walled in the city, the people of Jerusalem, those that decided to stay, And a major famine did break out, and it led to cannibalism and all sorts of absolutely horrible atrocities because they had no source. They had no way of getting food in from the outside. They were stuck there. The Roman army was surrounding the city and the temple. And so it did lead to absolutely horrible, horrible things. And so there is this sense in which what Jesus is talking about does have, like we said, immediate fulfillment, or at least fulfillment in AD 70.
Yeah, I mean, even just like if you're talking about this sort of tribulation, we like to think that Jesus is talking about something that is, coming. The Great Tribulation, which has not happened yet, or something. I don't think that that's the case. I think he's talking about something that largely the people he's talking to are going to experience, and I think that this is the thing. Like, if you read the Bible and you think that like God is just telling you a thing, and you read it as if you're the one it's written to, you're like, okay, like he's getting me ready for this thing. But you have to remember that he is talking to somebody, and it would make no sense for him to be saying these things to people standing in front of him. But by the way, you're going to experience none of this. Like, that would be crazy. Like, that would seem very strange. And so I don't think that's what he's doing at all. So I do think that this is largely stuff that did happen, and you even see like some of the implications of like how hard it's going to be for the Jewish Christians in the necessity of Paul raising money to give to the Jewish churches because they're all starving to death and stuff, like so the Gentiles start supporting the Jewish churches because they don't have anything, because everything does, in fact, everything just falls apart, and that does for sure happen.
Yep.
So I think where the modern reader gets hung up on these passages, I think that would all be very easy for people to accept if not for verse 22, which is, and if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. And it's specifically because of the whole allusion to no human being would be saved, which sounds rather universal and not sort of stuck to a particular event in history. And I think that that's oftentimes just, and I hate saying this kind of thing, but it's just a difficulty in the ability to translate the discussion happening with a group of people, and what in Greek, the grammars can be pretty specific on, which is none of those human people would ever be saved. And that's hard to put that into English in a way that makes a lot of sense just for the reading. And so it says no human being would be saved. And there's a lot of heavy lifting being done by the context here. Yep. If this is the prophecy of the destruction of the temple, he's talking about the people that are caught up in that event, that no human being of them would be saved.
Yep.
But that's hard. That's like, if you're just reading that, that's not what that sounds like. And that's a difficult thing to discern from that. And it's worth noting that this is prophecy. And prophecy is like difficult. I mean,
it's always got symbolic language. It's always got this sort of already not yet sort of thing,
right?
And you see that in the Old Testament, and you see it in the New Testament.
Yeah.
Well, I can make an attempt here. So, verse 22. So those days being cut short. Now you can think about this in the sense that like you sort of enter the tribulation. The second sort of Christ rises from the dead, the tribulation is underway.
That's 20. That's what people would say from 21, right? For then there will be great tribulation.
Yeah. So, and I think that there's some truth to that, and this is how prophecy works. That, like, yes, that's true. Now, I don't think that's. I think that's additionally what Jesus is talking about. So it's an additional application to this, but like specifically what he's talking about here, I do think is. What these specific people are going to experience that does also apply to us, but I do think that there's a way in which if that those days where you had all of this stuff going on, and the destruction of the temple and Rome, if those days were not cut short, you are right that yes, no one's going to survive this if these days don't. It could have gone on longer than it did. It didn't, and so those days were cut short.
It could have been an ultimate genocide of all the people.
That's right. Yes,
but
absolutely.
It wasn't.
And here's where you get to 22 and say if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. Is that it is necessary for those days to be cut short so that the gospel can go out? Because if everyone dies, all the proclaimers of this message die, then there is no one then to go out and proclaim this message, and then who gets saved, right? Like you can't have all the people whom God has put this message in their mouth all perish in this tribulation.
Well, that'd be a both and too.
Yeah.
So God's specifically protecting those who He's claimed, the elect, the Jewish Christians that were there, and for the sake of those Jewish Christians living on to be proclaimers of the gospel themselves.
Yeah, so that's why it's for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. What is that saying? It's saying, I'm going to save people, therefore I'm cutting these days short.
Yeah.
And what that means is this, not that they were supposed to be longer, but God stopped them from being, is that they might have naturally been longer, and God says, actually, I intervene in this. I end up putting a stop to this in my sovereignty for the sake of the elect.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, there also, I think a verse that might imply that this is about specifically the end of the world as opposed to, this event in the first century. Again, we don't want to try and pit these things against each other. We think it has implications for both. But in verse 27, he says, "For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man." And it's like, oh, well, that seems to be very clear about his second coming. But you can also read it in this is him coming in judgment at that time. And interestingly enough, the historian Tacitus says around the destruction of the temple, I've got this quote here from him. He says, "In the sky appeared a vision of armies in conflict, of glittering armor. A sudden lightning flash from the clouds lit up the temple. The doors of the holy place abruptly opened. A superhuman voice was heard to declare that the gods were leaving it, and in the same instant came the rushing tumult of their departure." Now, how reliable is Tacitus as a historian? I don't really know. I'm not a historian. I have not studied him deeply, or for that matter, Josephus deeply. But they do report these interesting events happening around the destruction of the temple that go beyond just, the famines or the implications that would normally happen when an army is invading you, that there seem to be supernatural seeming events happening around this whole thing. And not for nothing, that would make a whole lot of sense when we consider how central the temple was to everything in Jewish life.
Isn't the major point here that, listen, things are going to get crazy, and there are going to be people that say, hey, there's the Christ over there, there's the Christ over there, he's come again. And the idea here is, listen, when Christ returns, whether it's whether it's the judgment of Christ coming in the destruction of the temple, or the second coming, you're not going to need anyone to tell you. Right? You're not going to need that. You're not going to need someone to say, hey, good news, I found the Christ. That's not how this is going to work. You're going to know. You're going to know.
Yeah. Which, by the way, it is interesting that Vespasian, right around the time of the invasion of the temple, actually seemed to have had a mortal head wound. Everybody thought he was dead. And then suddenly he appears back to life in the late 60s. And so there were people being like, oh my goodness! It turns out he did not have a mortal head wound at all, but that was what people knew because they didn't have the kind of media we have today.
And we've had people. Obviously, in our lifetimes, and obviously many more before that, show up and saying, they start these cults, and they say, "I am Jesus returned," and this is a good passage for you to be like, "No, it's not." You know why? Because you'd know.
Yep.
You'd know. It's not. That's not how. The second coming is not like the first, right? That's not how it works. It's the whole world will understand what is happening.
Yep. Yep. He will, when he comes again, he will not be tucked away in a small, tiny town like Bethlehem.
There'll be no state of humiliation.
No.
It's coming in glory.
That's right. Exactly right. So we pick it up now at verse 29, continuing on in the discourse. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. So again, there's a sense in which there could be an immediate fulfillment of this, right? What does Jesus do? In fact, in the first century, he does send out his angels or his messengers. That can be translated either way. And he does gather elect people from every part of the globe, and he's still doing it today. He's going to be doing this right up until the end. So again, this is a good reminder that when Jesus ascends back to the throne, the end times begin. We are in the last days from that moment.
To have some perspective. Like, we see time in context of our lifespan. Yep. And so we see signs and things that make us believe that it's worse than it's ever been, without the context of even good context of human history, let alone context of God's span of time and view of time. And it's hard for us. This kind of stuff is hard for us because we want to, get a hold of it so tightly that we say we absolutely understand it and we absolutely know what's going on and we can absolutely definitively say this is this and that is that, and boy, why can't you see it to other people? And it's just, I'm sorry, it's just not as clear as that, other than you, if you are a Christian, are one of these messengers that's being sent out to spread the news, which is why I actually think, I'm going to take it a little bit more basic from verse 24, for false Christs and false prophets will arise. He's saying, preach me. Don't listen to other people saying that they're a new incarnation of me. Just keep preaching me. Just keep preaching me. Just keep preaching me. This is why I am going to preserve the elect. Keep preaching me. Keep preaching me. Keep preaching me. And eventually you'll know. Just as if you're not confused whether it's lightning or that when you see vultures, there's a dead body. You're going to know. It's not going to be a big, boy, I wonder if that dude in the wilderness is really Jesus come back. Keep preaching me, and you're going to know. And then even as we go forward, if you want to see this as your life, will you have tribulation? Yeah, you're going to have tribulation. If you are trying to understand this in a historical context, there's more research that can be done to see if some of this did already happen, right? But you will know. You will know. You're not going to have to keep guessing or looking for signs. This is exactly what he's saying. There probably are going to be some signs, but you're not going to need them. So, because you'll know.
Yeah, there's a sense for the Christian where we're always being sort of summoned to look up because our redemption draws nigh.
Yeah.
It's just always the case.
Yeah. And he can be doing two things at the same time. And Jesus moves, I think, in this passage or in this chapter, like in and out of two things, which is talking about the destruction of the temple, talking about what these people are going to immediately go through, and the second coming. Both things are true at the same time. So he's speaking in both ways. And I do think 29, through 31, largely probably is about like, hey, when the tribulation is over, like there's the second coming will in fact happen, and those can both. It doesn't have to be one or the other. He can be talking about everything that is happening after his departure up until his return, and he's just squishing it all together and talking. And he's talking about both things at the same time.
Well, and again, I think the key to sort of, beginning to understand how to read literature like this is going back to the Old Testament prophecies that Jesus fulfills to some degree. He fulfills all of them in both his first and second coming. We know that will be the case. But there are certain things that are prophesied about him that are specific to his second coming that haven't been fulfilled yet. And yet they're all, and even saying that at the time, like where Isaiah will prophesy about a son who is going to come, there is an immediate fulfillment of that with the king that is over him then. So there is this sense in which this is kind of the way prophecy works. This is the way it's relevant to you at the time. It really is, and yet it also is pointing to something that could and will happen in the future.
Well, I mean, I'm not trying to make this more complicated, and I know that there are answers to this, but just if this is speaking about something that is specifically, if you go all the way back to 15, right, the abomination of desolation, if this is all speaking about something that is to happen, there are a lot of things that have to happen before it happens because there is no temple.
That's right.
Right.
And there doesn't seem to be any political will within the nation of Israel, which is different than this, to do anything about that right now. Which
not
means
on any large scale. Yeah, you're
not
right.
on any large scale, and some pretty world-shaking stuff would have to happen for that to happen, including probably the destruction of the Dome of the Rock to build the temple in its place.
Yeah.
So I hate to say it this way, if you're looking for this to be a sign that you're close, you're probably not close as in within your lifetime, if you're alive right now, because there's just a lot of stuff that has to happen. In the meantime, that's probably not going to happen in the course of 3 or 4 years, 5 years, 10 years.
And I would even go so far as to say this. Like, Jesus foretells the destruction of the temple. He does not foretell the rebuilding of the temple.
Right, and you're looking at the reinstitution of a system that hasn't existed within Judaism for a little under 2,000 years.
That I would say that God ended because that Christ fulfilled it and is no longer necessary.
Correct.
And so,
yes. So if you're a Christian desiring the rebuilding of the temple,
why?
There's a fundamental contradiction in your thinking here.
Yes,
that's right.
Jesus has fulfilled that. You confess that.
Yes.
And by the way, I do think that sacrificing bulls and goats in a temple in Jerusalem would be an abomination in and of itself.
Yes.
Yes, like because Jesus is the final sacrifice once for all. This is what the whole book of Hebrews is about.
Do you believe that the cloak was torn, and what do you think it means?
Yeah. And so, I think those are all reasons why you're like, that part I think is done.
So that's all sort of good secondary evidence to believe that this is discussing at least those initial verses, the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. Is all I'm saying. It's like you can keep adding on this sort of secondary and tertiary evidence to it. You're never going to get to the point where you're like, 100% definitively this is what it is.
Sure.
But you can't do that with a lot of things here. You just have to be sort of content with what you can know.
Yeah. Embrace the mystery.
Yeah, well, and what we're going to see as we close out this chapter is that Jesus is going to say, like, hey, there's signs, and you can kind of know the season, but then we'll immediately tell you, like, hey, day and hour, forget about it.
Yeah. Now, in verse 32, he says, "From the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts out its leaves, you know the summer is near. So also when you see all these things, you know that he is near, at the very gates. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place." That is one of those verses that seems to very heavily imply that this is a first century thing primarily. "Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away." Now, at the same time as he says, when you see all these things, you know that he's near, right? Okay? Immediately after that, verse 36, "But concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son." Don't ask me to explain how that mind-bending reality can exist. But nevertheless, he says, only the Father knows. "For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day when Noah entered the ark, and they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and one left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and one left. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Now, I just want to point out something real quick here. I know we're getting close to running out of time. This is Jesus on the one hand says, you can look at the signs and you can see that like the Son is near. Okay? At the same time, we can't know with too much certainty when he's near. Because
the one thing you can really know from the first part of this is that Jesus can get a lot done with a fig tree.
Yeah,
he does do that.
Yeah.
That is the
other
illustration.
thing, just real quick, this is one of those passages that's been used as a proof text to defend the idea of a rapture before the second coming. And what is pointed out by the advocates of the rapture being seen here is that 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and one left. And they'll say the one taken is, of course, the person that's raptured. The problem with it is it doesn't logically flow from the argument he's just used with the story of Noah. You don't want to be the one taken away
Correct.
in the story of Noah. You don't want to be the one that is brushed away by a flood.
I can't believe you're implying that Kirk Cameron wasn't right about all this.
No, this is
Nothing against Kirk Cameron. I just think that this is, if you're just following the flow of Jesus' argument, the people that are taken away are not in a good place.
no.
That's not what you want here.
No, this is one of those things where it's like, man, you just got this completely backwards.
Yeah.
When Christ comes back, it is better to be left and not removed. Like when God removes things, that's not the part you don't want to be in that group. Okay, and like throughout Scripture, you don't want to be in that group. I'm going to remove them. Okay, that's not what you want. Also, yeah, I mean listen, this generation will not pass away till all of these things take place. I mean, good luck squaring that with like none of this has happened. That seems pretty on the nose.
You have to do some dancing.
You have to do some dance for sure. And look, the whole idea here is that you're supposed to be ready because the Son of Man is coming at an hour that you don't expect. So you can know a season, but you can't really know the time. And you might say like, well, what the heck, man? Like it's been a long time. That's the other thing is that like, hey, he's right at the gate. He's coming soon. It reminds me of the old Narnia thing, with Aslan and Lucy. When Aslan says like, hey, I'm gonna see you again, and she says, when? He says, soon. She says, when is soon? He says, I call all times soon.
Soon.
Yes.
I think. So if Jesus saying this, who himself says
Lewis is great with that. Lewis is great with that kind of thing.
Yes, he is really good at that.
Yeah.
So you have to know that Jesus himself says, I don't know, but I know it's soon. And so since he doesn't know the day or the hour, apparently, which is what he says, he's been saying soon for a long time.
A long time for us.
Yeah, for
and
us.
yet, as a day to him.
He's been saying soon forever. Yeah. I mean,
but it is soon. If you're eternal, it's pretty soon. It could be it could go on 1 million more years and it'd still be soon.
it could go on 10 million more years and it'd still be soon.
Yeah.
Look at 44 and kind of just read backwards. Therefore, you must also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. When he uses the thief coming into the house, that's a great one, right? Because most of us have probably gone our entire lives without our house being broken into, right? And yet we know it's a possibility, right? So if you're sort of responsible husband and father, you do try to be ready. You do check the doors at night. In my case, you shut your gate and you make sure that the guns are loaded. Eric has some experience with that. And then you whatever you do, whatever it is, your ritual, your liturgy to make sure that your house is protected when you go to sleep at night. Nonetheless, but you don't know when it's going to happen. But every night you sort of stay vigilant, and that's what he's saying here. That's why he uses that example.
Yeah, it's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Great illustration.
All right. Well, we have run out of time. It's actually, you might think, oh, man, there's a little bit more of this chapter. Can't you just do it? It's actually a good break because this section leads right into the parable of the 10 virgins in 25, which is directly related to the next section. So that actually works out pretty well. Hey, he calls all time soon. So I think the message here is maybe, and I think this may be the important thing to say. I think I could say this for all three of us, but I do not believe that there is anything that must happen for Jesus to return that has not happened. Therefore, this is why he can say, like, you should just watch, be ready.
Right.
It could be tomorrow, it could be a million years from now, but there is no event that is delaying Christ, other than what Peter says, which is the patience of God desiring that more people be saved. It's the only reason he tarries. There is no,
That's it.
political event that has to happen. There's nothing in the world that has to happen. Peter will tell you expressly, the only reason that Christ has not returned is his desire that more people get saved. And you got to know that every minute that you live in this life, little babies enter the world, and Jesus cares about those babies and decides, I'm waiting longer.
One more day, baby. One more day.
This is what it is. And God is looking down, desiring that every person that enters this creation is someone who he desires to be brought to repentance and eternal life. And so this is why the Lord tarries, not because some temple doesn't exist somewhere or some nation needs to rise up against some other nation. It's much more compassionate than that. There is nothing that we're doing or not doing, or that God is waiting on us to do, that is stopping him from returning. It is strictly his patience, which you should count as his love for those who are, his creation. And so that's what it is. All right.
Well said, Dan. Amen, brother.
All right, boys.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there. We will be back next episode. We're going to get back into some parables. Jesus telling some late in the game parables, and we're going to get into that next episode. I'll see you guys then.
All right, sounds
Bye.
good.